Pleasure to be here, not just because the sage Gateshead is one of my favourite places on earth, affording as it does a fantastic view of Newcastle, and as the MP for Newcastle, I'm very proud that the conference is here in Gateshead. In recent years, the northeast of England has seen more new technology startups than any region in the UK outside of London. And it is a rapidly growing hotbed of creative talent. We've got extensive linkages between business support networks, universities. We've got top quality incubator facilities around the northeast and a number of high tech business parks. And so I welcome the Northeast's emergence as one of the world's leading centres of digital games development and startups, with a cluster of firms, universities, and a magnet for entrepreneurs and students. And I'm also pleased to be here on a more personal basis. Before I entered Parliament in 2010, I had what my constituents like to call a proper job in the real world, and I was a professional engineer. And most recently I was head of telecoms technology at Ofcom, which is the UK regulator. I was working for communications. I focused on superfast broadband, fibre, standards, applications. So I spent quite a lot of time at conferences like this, talking about regulation, not so exciting, but also looking at the barriers to creating a level playing field for emerging applications in gaming, audiovisual, etc. So I feel relatively at home in an environment where technology meets mass market applications, which is what you've been focusing on for the last couple of days. But there is another reason why I feel quite at home here, which, to be absolutely frank, is much less welcome. And that is that as a professional engineer, I spent 23 years working in an all or predominantly male environment. When I started my degree, 12% of my fellow electrical engineering students were women. That was almost 30 years ago, which sounds like a depressingly long time. But the most depressing thing about that is not how long it has been, but the fact that right now, whilst women make up 43% of GPs, they make up 41% of solicitors. They've even managed to make up a quarter of MPs. The proportion of female engineering students is exactly the same. It hasn't increased at all. And one might argue that, okay, electrical engineering is a bit of an old world subject. I worked for Cable and Wireless for many years. That was founded in 1860. So it's perhaps understandable that it inherited, and electrical engineering more generally, inherited the gender balance of the Victorian era. And the Royal Society didn't admit women for the first 300 years of its existence. But the gaming industry is much younger. It's much younger, just looking around here. It has a younger makeup. And it's only beginning, I would say, to enter into maturity. We have the last report from the Interactive Software Federation of Europe, shows that video games really are coming of age as a mainstream activity. So almost a third of people in the UK older than 16 describes themselves as gamers. And actually, if you look at people between the ages of 16 and 19, 3/4 describe themselves as gamers. And gaming is increasingly seen as a way of, better way of educating people, socialization, information dissemination, intellectual development, innovation, communication, marketing, and of course, entertainment. The gamization of our lives is something that's talked about in business, in universities, and seminars, at conferences, and even by politicians. PwC estimate that the global market for video games will rise from 50 billion in 2009 to almost 90 billion in 2014. And it's an area where the UK does very well. The UK video games industry is the largest in Europe. So I suppose my question to you is, why is such a modern and a successful sector stuck in the dark ages when it comes to gender balance? Because things are bad and they're actually getting worse. So Charles mentioned computing A-level. The proportion of computing A-levels taken by women went down from 12% to 8% between 2004 and 2011. And there's only one girl for every 11 boys in the average UK A-level computing class. So just think about how that feels if you're outnumbered 11 to 1. And perhaps that's the reason why last year only 241 women took A-level computer science in the whole of the UK. At the same time, half of the UK's state schools send no girls at all to sit physics, A-level physics. Between 2001 and 2011, the percentage of tech jobs held by women actually declined from 22% to 7%. And if you look at gaming more specifically, the actual figures go from bad to worse. Not in terms of who uses gaming. I think what's interesting is that over the last 20, 30 years, we've really seen the profile of gamers change. So that now, of the most frequent game purchasers, 54% are male and 46% are female. And those figures are reflected in other studies, such as the Interactive Software Federation. Most of them give an almost even gender balance between men and women actually playing video games. And in the US, figures from the US, they say that women 18 or older are double the proportion of gamers than boys 17 or younger. So it's actually more of the market is older women than younger boys, which is something I found surprising. So women are proportionally represented as gamers, but they're hugely underrepresented in the industry, which I can tell, just by looking around me here, but more scientifically. Dr. Joe Twist, who is the CEO of the UK trade body UKIE, UK Interactive Entertainment, has said that even accounting for the poor performance of the education system in terms of supporting girls in computing, the games industry can work harder to ensure that women make up a reasonable proportion of the workforce. Creative skill set figures suggest that just 6% of employees are women. And obviously the fear is that if that's the proportion of overall employees, then those actually working in development of video games, if you take out marketing and human resources and sales, those actually working in developing games, the proportion is even lower. So I could go on. I've got lots more figures that I could, which are equally depressing, and which show that the UK is actually doing worse than the rest of Europe or the OECD countries. But rather than berate the industry with figures, I want to focus on what we can do about it, what we can do as an industry, as civil society, and also what the government can do. And I think there's a lot that industry can do. As I said, I worked in the tech industries for 23 years. Often I was lucky enough to have great male bosses, who really were determined to make sure that working in an all-male environment wouldn't be a barrier to a successful career for a woman. And that was fantastic, and I owe a lot to them. But I've also known other managers who were not so supportive, and certainly company cultures which worked against attracting girls and women into ICT and did absolutely nothing to help them stay there. You may be familiar with the Twitter hashtag, One Reason Why. which gives reasons for women not wanting to work in the gaming industry. It is quite depressing. However, there's the hashtag One Reason to Be, which gives reasons why women should be in gaming and what they get out of gaming. And its curator is a woman called Rihanna Pratchett, who's also the Tomb Raider scriptwriter. And she said that the industry is in need of a shake-up, but it's a shake-up that should benefit everyone and not only women. And I guess that's what I'd really agree with. This is to the benefit of everyone in the gaming industry, but more widely as well within the economy and the country. And so as a Shadow Minister for Innovation, last year I wrote to 10 of the leading tech companies in this country, basically sort of asking them what are they doing to improve the situation. Now the responses are summarised on my website, www.chionwurahmp.com. I won't go through them all. But what was quite amusing was that a fifth of the responses were addressed to Mr. Onwurah, which I won't name the companies, but it did make me wonder how accustomed they were to engaging with women. And what was also quite striking was that Google and Microsoft, which were two of the more younger dynamic companies there, refused to release any figures on the proportion of women they employed in ICT. And they cited confidentiality for their reason. Now that suggests that either Google and Microsoft don't know how to aggregate and anonymize data, which, given that they are leading figures in big data, is slightly worrying, or that they have so few women working in ICT that just giving the number will identify them individually, which is also pretty worrying. But of those companies that did respond, it was impressive the range of activities they were taking to try and encourage more women into their companies. Most said that the main problem was a lack of qualified female candidates. Most talked about what they were doing to overcome this, from changing corporate procedures, so there's always a woman on an interview panel to encourage more women to come forward, to intervening early in schools to steer girls through STEM careers. All the companies emphasised the importance of role models, female role models, in encouraging female graduates or apprentices to join them, and talked about the networking forums that they and the groups for high potential female employees that they were forming. ARM said that they were doing a lot of this, but that the most effective means would be role models on TV who made the subject sexy and exciting, to quote. And I would agree with that. And I actually think that a high-profile TV series about a complex, flawed, but ultimately sympathetic female games developer would probably change perceptions overnight. The series Silent Witness led to a huge increase in the proportion of girls studying forensics. But I think that there's a more wider range of issues that we're facing than simply the image of ICT. And we need to look at the working environment. We need also to look at higher education, secondary education, primary education, and careers advice. There isn't any one simple solution. But it's certainly the case that a culture which socializes girls to think ICT is not for them is part of the problem. There's been a bit of an Twitter squabble about the fact that Tesco's labelled chemistry sets as being for boys, whilst pink cookers are labelled as being for girls. And they said that was because that was what their customers wanted. The reaction on Twitter was, I think they've backed down from that now. So there are a large number of initiatives, as I've said, and a couple of weeks ago I held a debate in the House of Commons on this. It was International Girls into ICT Day, not particularly widely known, but I crowdsourced ideas from Twitter, about what we can do about it, and I was really impressed by the number of responses, and I'll just give some of them. There's computer clubs for girls, which have reached 135,000 girls in over 3,800 schools. Little Miss Geek, Geek Girls, Science Girl, Athena Swan, STEMnet, Primary Engineer, which takes engineers into primary schools. So there's lots of initiatives, and I hope some of you guys will get involved in them. Particularly, I went into a local primary school a couple of weeks ago to talk about being an engineer, and it was a great experience. But I think the challenge is for government to look at all these initiatives and to try and assess how well they're working and what we can do to make them work better. And it's not really a challenge that government's taken up. So in the debate, I talked about the fact that the government ended funding for UKRC, which was the organisation dedicated to supporting girls. There's this decision, but it hasn't put anything in its place. We've got less careers advice for in general, and careers advice is so key because young women and girls, like myself, who didn't have engineers or computer specialists in their immediate family circle, getting an idea of what the career involves, it depends on the careers advice. And we've also got less support for small and medium businesses, and that's really an issue because small and medium businesses don't have big HR departments or big recruitment budgets, and they can often end up relying on, you recruit your friends, which is cheap in terms of recruitment budget, but does mean that the diversity tends to remain the same. Now, of course, employing your friends isn't something that's just limited to small businesses. Large organisations do it, even governments do it. But I think it's an important area, given the proportion of companies in the sector which are small and medium enterprises, there should be more support on offer for skills recruitment. So basically what I say we need is a plan, targets and a framework to help us assess if we're on the right track. Now, the government's current position is that they offered lots of warm words of support, but they don't believe in targeting girls. They believe in raising the profile of ICT and computing more generally, but not actually targeting girls. And again, I would say that after a lot of experience in this industry, this sort of gender-blind approach is not going to work. It hasn't worked so far. The lack of women in ICT is an absolute scandal, which shames us as a country. But I'd also say it's a loss to the country economically, and it's a loss to the sector. So it's a loss to the country in having a talent pool, which is only half the size it could be. So the Livingston Hope Skills Review of Video Games and Visual Effects, which reported last year, I think it was, said that UK growth was being held back by a lack of skills in video gaming. And there's no wonder if we're excluding half the population. It's also a loss to women because they don't have entry to these really exciting and fulfilling careers, and also relatively well-paid careers. So on average, salaries in technology are 50% higher than salaries elsewhere. And that's one of the reasons why we have such a gender pay gap. So it represents a loss to the industry, because who knows what kind of innovative and exciting games would be developed if they weren't all being developed by developers with a Y chromosome. And it's an additional, I would say, an intangible but hugely important loss, is that technology will never have the position it merits at the heart of our society and economy if it remains the preserve of a narrow section of society. So to drive forward our economy, particularly sustainably in the long term, ICT needs to be a full part of our society and culture. We've given the economic, social, climatic, environmental, you name it, given the challenges that we face, we really can't allow ICT to remain an exclusively male occupation. And so just to finish by saying that the gender balance in ICT is a critical issue for society, for government, and for industry. And we really need more than warm words in terms of leadership if we're going to do something about it. Thank you very much.
That's fascinating. Very, very wise words. Thank you. I hope that they don't fall on deaf ears at all. I think we probably very enthusiastically received that message.
That's great. Thank you.
Would you like to take some questions?
I'm happy to take some if there are. Oh, there was. Oh, wow.
Fantastic.
Oh.
Okay. we have this rather crazy ball
Oh, wow.
that we throw around.
Oh, that's very good. Well caught.
Do you think that positive discrimination has any role to play?
Well, you know, I'm certainly very much against the effective positive discrimination that means we end up with 93% of all developers being men. So given that, and given that we need to change that, then within the sort of the framework of employment law, etc., there are, if you call girls' computer clubs positive discrimination, if you call making sure, I think, making sure that there are women on interview panels discrimination, if you call looking to develop games which encourage, because gaming is a great way of testing innovation and also computing skills in itself. So developing gaming interfaces which are attractive to girls, then those sorts of forms of, and also, and this was why I was particularly annoyed with Google and Microsoft, publishing the proportion of women that are working in your ICT department, not having quotas, I don't think, but just so that people know how well you're doing. Those kinds of measures, which are, I would say, sort of positive encouragement rather than actual positive discrimination as legally defined. I think there's definitely a role for that. Thank you. Ah, you got a third as well, huh?
Thank you very much. As I've been speaking to a lot of the young students here over the past day or so, many of them aspire to get enough points so that they can get a visa to go to North America to work. Really? The coalition government has put forward tax breaks for the gaming industry, and earlier it was mentioned about Michael Gove's education reforms. Why has the Labour Party not supported these measures and, in effect, support the gaming industry now that it's in opposition?
Well, I think in fact, I know that the Labour government has certainly, in government, certainly supported the gaming industry. And in terms of the tax breaks, my understanding is that there were tax breaks which were then removed and then brought back by this government. So tax law is obviously a very complex area, but that's my understanding of the evolution of the tax environment for the video games industry. When it comes to computing and what Michael Gove has done, I certainly support it's very sad to say, but I actually did computing in my computing O-level, I think it was, using the big mainframe at Newcastle University. That's how long ago it was. But there was certainly writing computer programs was certainly a part of computing when I studied it. And I think that under Labour, the last 15 years, ICT course lost some of that. So I certainly support that. But you have to look at that in the context of a curriculum which supports and values computing and science. I think Michael Gove's focus is far too much on going back to the 50s and not looking forward to the skills that we need, in the future and the modern education in a modern, industry. So I think there's I would say the support for where we see the positive measures, and there's argument, debate, and lack of support for where we feel that this government is taking us backwards.
Thanks very much. Just another small question. Shouldn't it be up to the individual to decide what sector they want to work in? I mean, there's a similar sex disparity in teaching and nursing. And that's obviously because of, I decided, I want to get into gaming or I don't want to get into gaming.
Do you really think I'm proposing that there should be forced career choices on anyone outside of the royal family, maybe? Absolutely, it's absolutely up to the individual. I just want to make sure those choices are based on information and a welcoming and supportive environment.
Hi there. This is more of an observation. So I employ a lot of people. Actually, I think within dev staff we probably have 10% female. But I think I'm speaking for the rest of us here as game developers. It's like we'd all love more female employees in our companies. Yeah, we're all male orientated, but we only employ on the people with the skills. We don't look at race, religion, or gender. It's irrelevant. So whoever comes in, it's very easy to say, are they good artists, are they good designer, are they good programmer, they get the job. So asking us to employ more females is irrelevant. It's like more females need to come up through the system, and that's a case of them seeing that it's a cool career. And up to now, they probably haven't looked at these things when they were sort of young teenagers thinking, oh, it's cool to get into games. They probably haven't thought that way. Hopefully, since the advent of iPads and smartphones and getting on Facebook, they're more interested, but we'd all love to employ more females.
What's your company called again?
Blitz Games.
Blitz Games. Okay, I worked in technology and engineering for 23 years. I spoke to many who said, like you, in the industry, that it was nothing to do with them, that they were all egalitarian, that it was just, oh, wow, there's never any women who apply. And I know, working in the industry, let me say that firstly, the future pipeline of skills is part of your responsibility. Working in this industry now, if you want the industry to be sustainable, you have got to have skills coming through. Secondly, it is also about the working environment. And I can promise you that there are things that you can do to make the working environment better and to communicate that better to those outside, and particularly in schools and in those who are forming the pipeline of skills coming through. So if what you're saying to me, which I think is what you're saying, that it's nothing to do with you, it's not your fault.
No, I've got to say feel that most developers would welcome more females. It's purely based on skills.
But let's do something more proactive than just say you would welcome if they happen to come along. Let's do something more proactive about it. That's what I'm saying. I'm getting a red flashing light, and I'm getting lots of things to say that I have to leave. So, yes.
I think we genuinely think this is a really big issue. We totally support it. I would go slightly further and say that yesterday afternoon we had Pauline Jacquet, who's a very senior Ubisoft studio manager.
Right.
I think it is changing. They were talking. A lot of people have talked very proudly about the proportion of women that they employ. I think at the Ubisoft studios it's about 20%. Right. We're quite a small developer. Ours is about 30%. I mean, it's not positive discrimination. It's just we have women who apply for jobs and they're great. And, so I mean, clearly it is both sides. It's both encouraging girls at school to come in, and then the industry being very active. And I promise you, it's not quite as bad as it seems, because there's a lot of debate about it, and there's a lot of enthusiasm from the industry to encourage it. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. And I really
thank you.
do want to encourage the industry, and I do think it's a fantastic industry. So, yeah, thanks very much.